Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of The Menu Mix. I'm Matt Holy.
And I'm George Wetz. Now, this week, we've got a very tasty episode lined up for you where we caught up with Robin Robison, who is president of Modern Market and Homegrown Kitchen. So stay dialed in because Robin gives us the inside scoop on the recent acquisition that Thrive made to Modern Market. It's going to talk about their menu innovation and also female leadership in hospitality and a bunch more stuff as well.
But first, let's jump into some hospitality trends that have caught our eye this week. This is The Menu Mix.
Ladies and gentlemen.
This is The Menu Mix. Welcome to The Menu Mix.
The Menu Mix.
The Menu Mix.
Conversations with thought leaders about the future.
The future of hospitality.
Trends.
Perspectives.
Now sit back, pour yourself a glass of something nice, and enjoy the episode.
That's so tasty.
Okay, so this week, our theme, Matt, is going to be M&A, mergers and acquisitions. That's right, and they are coming back.
They definitely are. They're back, baby. They're really back. Ever since Jay Powell announced those rate cuts recently, 0.5 point reduction, getting the bulls very, very excited. I think we're going to see a ton of new deals come through towards the end of this year and into the beginning of 2025.
That's right, because 2023 was really slow. And that was compared to the year before. Like it was about 12.5% slower than the year before and almost 30% less than 2021. So it's been kind of depressed in activity for quite some time. So interesting now that it is coming back and there's been a slew of activity that's been recently announced. TGI Fridays was one really interesting example where the UK franchisee was going to buy the parent brand and then that fell through. And now another company, D&D, looks like it's going to look to acquire the subsidiary in the UK. So that's been a really interesting one to watch. We've also had a bunch more, right? We have Mod Pizza, Chewy's to Darden, Playa Bowls, Clean Juice, Alamo Draft House, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, Benihana. There's been a bunch. So yeah, and this is all since May.
All since May, yeah. Essentially, prior to May, it was almost silent. In anticipation of these rate cuts, combined with a couple of other factors, all these deals have been coming through. It's really kind of told the story of the K-shaped recovery where some of these acquisitions are happening because brands have like really high brand recognition, but maybe their sales were declining a little bit, closing some stores. So either private equity or the other group that acquired them thought it was a really good deal. They got the brand at a discount, or there's some other groups who've continued to crush it over the past few years, really, really high growth, and private equity or again, the restaurant group that acquired them just wanted to continue riding that wave. So interesting to see, really excited to see the next few that we'll see come through towards the end of the year.
And it's that second category, the growth mode category that we're going to be speaking to Robin about in a moment. Really interesting conversation where she reveals kind of the inside track on how they thought about the acquisition, how those conversations went, and now what post-acquisition looks like. So if you're either looking to acquire or you're a brand that is looking to be acquired, there's going to be something in this conversation for you. So brilliant conversation. I'm going to hand it over now to our interview with Robin Robison.
All right. So joining us today is Robin Robison, former COO of Modern Market, but as of very recently, now the president of Thrive Restaurant Group. Her extensive industry experience includes leadership roles at Red Robin, Bob Evans, and Chili's, and she is a prominent advocate for women's leadership in hospitality, having previously won the Women's Food Service Forum Leadership Award. You may have seen her speak at conferences including RLC and the ICX Summit, and now we are incredibly excited to have her on the Menu Mix. Robin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matt. Hi, George. Great to see you guys.
You too, Robin. You too. Well, we're really excited to have you on the show. And first, I was going to dive straight in and would love to ask you a few questions about the recent acquisition by Thrive. So could you just start by giving us some context of how this deal came about?
Yes, of course. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's exciting what you guys have started with the podcast. So thank you very much for asking me to be a part of your podcast. So the acquisition, I am absolutely thrilled with this acquisition. And, we were previously owned by a private equity firm, Butterfly, who were amazing partners for us. But I think everybody knows private equity buys and sells companies all the time. And I couldn't be more excited about the sale from Butterfly to Thrive Restaurant Group. Thrive was our first franchisee of Modern Market Eatery. I describe it as when we started this journey with Thrive years ago, that we were dating them, right? And then when we got to meet them in person and really understand the culture, and the culture being around being very people centric while still taking great care of the business, we knew it was a perfect match for us. And so we quickly got engaged and got married, and they actually opened, they bought our Austin market, and they've opened two in Kansas City. And when this opportunity came about, they were really excited to purchase Modern Market Eatery. And so we've now become even more of a family through this acquisition. So I have personally taken on an opportunity to not only operate and oversee and lead Modern Market Eatery, but a second brand called Homegrown, which is a daytime eatery. So I'm really excited about the opportunity and mostly about the people I get to work with and work for, and what we can do in the future to help our restaurants and our people thrive.
That's great. Great summary. I mean, we're so excited for you and to see where this partnership goes. And you talked a little bit like it's like dating in
Yeah.
the early days. I'd love to kind of for other companies that might be out there, they might be thinking about an acquisition process at some point in their brand's evolution. And it would be really fascinating to hear from you kind of how that early experience in the partnership went. And then maybe as talks began to emerge, share a bit of insight into the kind of the thoughts, the feelings, the excitement, the worries that you had along the way, to give a bit of an insider feel as to how that process is.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question because it's so important as you grow your business to partner with the right people. That's everything from vendors to your team that you hire. But in our first venture to franchise was really, really important to us and to Thrive to find the right partner. Thrive is a very big organization. They have Applebee's. They're the second largest. We are the second largest Applebee's franchisee, as well as just signing a 30-unit deal with Qdoba. And then we have developed two companies within Thrive ourselves. I mentioned it earlier, the homegrown eatery concept, and then also Carlos O'Kelly's, a Mexican concept. And then they dipped their toes into a better for you brand through a Modern Market. And I would say to anybody that's thinking about an acquisition or thinking about buying a franchise or becoming a franchisee, that the cultural fit is really, really important to find organizations that share your brand ethos, share your passions, are really important. And for us, it was really around making sure, as I said earlier, that people became the center of what you do. We know that we can't accomplish anything without the right people in place, engaged and excited about what they're doing. And then, making sure that the food is something that you can be proud of. I once had a mentor tell me, if you can't wear a shirt around with the name of your organization on it with pride, then you're probably not with the right organization. And so being really proud of the food that you serve and the people that you partner with or you franchise with, that they can have that same level of pride.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that's critical to any acquisition process and the success is the team and the people who have been, working for one owner for a period of time. And now they're also transitioning to working for a different owner. So could you give some insight into how you, like when in the process and how you communicated that change to the team and maybe how you kind of communicate the opportunity to them to make them feel bought into the journey.
Yeah, I think a lot of people shared my excitement around it because we had the opportunity to interact with so many people from Thrive through them being our franchisee, which I don't think you always get that, right? You don't always get that opportunity. But knowing that we had worked with such great people everywhere from their finance team and accounting team to their facilities team, clear up to the CEO, John Rolfe, knowing that those experiences were good, that we were able to challenge each other respectfully in the process was the best part of it. So bringing people on the journey honestly was pretty easy because of those past experiences. I'm a firm believer that experiences create beliefs with people. And if you're creating those right beliefs along the way or those right experiences along the way, people's belief will be aligned with the organization.
Very interesting. And talking of experiences, your own role and portfolios changed through this process as well. Give us a bit of insight of going from leading like the operations as a COO role into a president role. Like, what are some of the differences? And I think for people that might be going on this transition later in their careers, how have you learned so quickly? Like, who have you leveraged? Like, how has the learning process been for you?
Well, I will full on admit that I think learning is a journey, right? And you don't learn it all at once and then move past it. So I anticipate that there's going to be a lot more learning and a lot more people that I'm able to tap into. I call them my personal board of directors. So people that you can trust and that have either walked the road before you or have great insights into the road that you're walking, and that'll be honest with you and truthful with you. So I think that's important to acknowledge that and find your own personal board of directors, people that are going to look you in the eye and say, actually, that's probably not the right thing to be thinking about or doing, or applaud you for what you're thinking about or doing with your organization. So I think that's important. Um, but in terms of the transition and the learning there, I'll set it up by saying that I spoke earlier to all the brands that are within Thrive. And so there are actually three presidents within Thrive, all reporting to John, our CEO, John Rolfe. One is the president of our shared services or our office in Wichita. And then we have two verticals that are restaurant focused specifically. So Mike Coffey is my partner in crime. I've known him for years, known him in the Chili's days. He is the president of franchised brands, meaning we've franchised from Applebee's, we've franchised from Qdoba. He's leading those brands. I'm leading the other vertical, which are brands that we want to take to market and franchise eventually, while still running our corporate owned restaurants. So those two brands specifically right now are Modern Market Eatery and Homegrown.
Great. So it sounds like it's great that you have that partner in crime. There's someone
Yep.
you can bounce ideas off and learn and be peers in this journey together. And as you're talking about franchisees, it made me think about this deal. And this is maybe an unusual or a less typical way for an acquisition to come about. Do you think we're going to see a trend as more franchisees are going to look to kind of buy out a franchise or brand? Is that something you think we might see more of?
Look, you never know in this business. I mean, we've all seen the news and the headlines as of late with a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of sales. So I think there's all sorts of different ways this can happen. Do I think a franchisee can be strong and grow and potentially grow from the acquisition perspective of acquiring their corporate team? I would say yes. Is it going to be a trend? I don't know. I think it's also important to recognize that brands go through stages, life stages, right? And so there are times that brands are growing and sometimes they're not in a growth phase. And I think that speaks a lot to what people think about in terms of whether or not they want to acquire another brand. And I'll give you an example. So I think that the trend right now may be larger franchisees acquiring smaller franchisees within the same concept.
Mm.
Thrive is one of those. Thrive has acquired franchisees for Applebee's through the process and made those restaurants part of our portfolio. So they bought out another franchisee within the same system. So I think that's probably more likely because you already know how to operate the brand. This is a very unique space in which a parent company would be purchased by a franchisee. But I don't think anything's off the table right now in the landscape of what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, there's just loads going on and interesting deals we've been seeing coming through. And
Yep.
I wanted to pick on one thing you mentioned, which was, brands being at different stages and there's a growth stage to it. Modern Market's clearly within that as a brand. So now that you're part of the Thrive family, can you share some of your plans for how you're looking to grow the brand over the next couple of 3 years?
Yeah, our hopes are to continue to grow from a company owned perspective as well as a franchisee perspective. So, anybody out there that's listening to this podcast that wants to be with a great company as a franchisee of better for you food, we're your place. We're your one stop shop, to be honest with you. But our internal plan is to continue to market to potential franchisees and grow the brand across the country with that, as well as continuing to grow from a company owned perspective.
Great. I think it's a nice segue in this idea of kind of marketing. You've put the name out there to potential franchisees. What would your advice be to brands who are looking to position themselves to engage in an acquisition conversation at some point in the not too distant future?
I think that's a really good question around what the future state is for each brand, right? And so thinking through that, I'll go back to the cultural piece and then just connecting within the industry, continuing to go to trade shows, continuing to find people in your own communities that could be a potential company to sell to or that could acquire you is important. I do think at the same time, you really have to evaluate what you want for your future, for the future of the brand, and really be clear at defining what the future of your brand is before you start to go to market to talk about somebody else acquiring you. Because at that point, as an owner of your brand, you have every time you go through something like this, you have less and less control over what the brand is going to look like in the future. And if that's appealing to you and exciting for you, then go for it. If you're an owner operator that wants to keep things close to the vest, I would take some time to grow your brand yourself before you put it out there to market to others.
Mm, very good advice. Interesting.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And yeah, I mean, you were talking a lot about the state of the industry right now, kind of positioning yourself to grow your brand. And I think in looking at Modern Market, especially over the last few years, I certainly think you've done a great job at positioning yourself in terms of offering like a really unique menu. So can you walk us through, I guess, your menu development and menu innovation strategy and why it works so well for a concept like Modern Market?
Absolutely. George also asked earlier about the plans moving forward, and I neglected to mention that we are also licensed partners with airports and major universities with Modern Market. That is also a great way to get your brand out there, to get branding occurring more frequently because so many more people are exposed to it. So, talking about menu, and that's what reminded me of it, Matt, was as we develop our menu, we have company owned restaurants to think about. Franchisees, pretty easy to think about because they are required to serve your menu. But licensees can be a little bit different, right? Because on a college campus, there may be some different needs. We don't serve breakfast at Modern Market in our what we call our street locations. But for example, at the airport, we serve breakfast. It's a known entity at the airport that we need to we need to make sure that our menu is versatile enough to meet the needs of our licensees and the guests within airports or students on campus. So I think we have an amazing culinary team led by our VP of culinary, who is Nate Weir, Chef Nate, we call him. And he does an awesome job of staying up on current trends for our menu development. But quite frankly, we are with Yumpingo, not only for being able to have insights around the voice of our guest and really hearing what our guest has to say, but also as we put our surveys out there to our guests, whether they're off-prem guests or dine-in guests, we are able to extract some really valuable menu information because our guests rate us on every single menu item that they order. And they rate us on a number of metrics within each menu item. And Chef Nate is actually able to take that and look at what menu items are performing well, not only from a culinary innovation perspective, but from an execution perspective. He's able to come back to the operators, to my COO, and say, hey, we think there's some opportunity to get better at this item or these items based on execution of the items. But he's also able to go back to his team and say, hey, people are really loving, as an example, salmon. People love our salmon. And it's served baked roasted salmon, fresh salmon from Norway. And he's able to take that item and say, that's a star on our menu. What else can we do with the salmon? And so we're in the middle of a limited time offer, an LTO right now, that Nate and his team did an incredible job of putting together a fresh, cold salmon salad. Think chicken salad, think tuna salad, but sub in salmon, which is just an amazing item. And we're serving that both in a wrap and on a salad. And the guest feedback has been incredible, both on our on-prem with just interacting with our guests and talking to them, but also through Yumpingo, through our surveys. Chef Nate has been able to see, how the guests are responding to the salmon salad, but we're also able to see from an operational execution perspective what we're doing well and what the guests love and what we can work on. So it's been an amazing journey. We'll continue on that journey with twice a year LTO development. And then we also do twice a year just menu development, really centered around more seasonal. So moving, as an example, from salads. So a couple of our salads in the summer have strawberries, fresh, beautiful strawberries that are really applicable to a summer menu. But as we move into winter, transitioning those to grapes. And those are fresh grapes in the winter and fresh strawberries in the summer. So small menu tweaks twice a year that also gives us the runway to introduce new menu items as Nate and his team develop those.
Yeah, the approach it's always a tough balance, especially when you have quite a few locations to deal with of what sounds great on paper, what is good in practice, and how could you kind of balance the two. You did touch on a couple of interesting points, I guess, around supply chain. So you mentioned the salmon was kind of a protein that your guests really, really like. The data said guests want more salmon. What else could we do with it? You have salads, you have wraps. But then you also mentioned for some of like the college campuses or airport locations, you have to serve breakfast. So could you walk us through how, I guess, your menu strategy and like supply chain come together to make sure that everything makes sense from a food cost perspective and execution perspective while keeping your guests as happy as possible?
Yeah. It's really a team effort, as you really just mentioned it, Matt. How do you work with your supply chain team to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction around menu development? And then how do you get menus set that work across both company-owned, franchise, and licensed partners? And I think we do an amazing job with it. It's in transition right now. Quite frankly, we are working with some new folks in a newly established supply chain team with Thrive. So we've started out of the gate with having weekly calls to make sure that not only are we talking about existing items and any potential supply chain challenges that the operators are having, but we're also doing a good bit of forward looking, saying what's in the pipeline of development that we need to start looking at. In addition, just those simple menu changes that I talked about, moving from one ingredient to a different ingredient just because it's a seasonal item. So seasonal veggies, seasonal fruits. So it's been a really great process to watch Nate and his team develop an ongoing pipeline of menu items and getting those products in, testing, tasting those products, 6 months, 8 months out before we actually put anything into development. And then we do several iterations of a menu item. When we developed the salmon, we probably taste tested 15 different salmon salads before we actually landed on one specific salmon salad. And then we had to go back and do taste tests on both the actual salad that it was put on, as well as the wrap and the builds of those and the taste profiles around those before we landed. So it's a bit of an iteration process. I will say that when you think about supply chain in general and what you mentioned with costs, you have to develop what I would call the Cadillac of the menu item. What is the very best possible menu item you can develop that is, the whole goal is to increase traffic and to increase sales through these new items and to give our marketing team new things to talk about, right? As we take it to market. That said, we also have a responsibility to our financials. And so we set targets internally around what our COGS should be, our cost of goods should be for menu items. And we do really a barbell approach to it where you could have a few menu items that are on the higher end of the cost of goods platform and some that are on the lower end that allow you to land in the middle at your goal of what you want to accomplish with your COGS line, so that you're responsible to your P&L, but developing really tasty, delicious items for your guests as well.
That's great. Yeah, it's a really interesting approach. I know supply chain is very much in the spotlight right now, I feel like, for a lot of brands, especially in just trying to find creative ways to cross-utilize ingredients and that type of thing. But yeah, you mentioned something interesting that I feel like could help transition us into the next part of the conversation, which was your barbell pricing strategy. It's no secret that customers are feeling the pinch. Some of them are definitely feeling the pinch of the economy and the market right now. And George, I believe you have some thoughts on this kind of flight to value that we're seeing. So if you want to take it from here and go into the future, that'd be great.
We're on the same page, Matt. I had the same thought of segue in my mind, which is, thinking about pricing strategy. I'm so curious to hear from you because I speak to a bunch of people trying to make sense of what the US consumer is doing right now. There's, compared to a year or two ago, things kind of seemed clearer in terms of behavior. Now there seems to be a real mix. So when you think about, modern market customers, maybe differently to the broader Thrive group, actually, can you give your analysis on how you would describe consumer habits and preferences and behavior having changed over the last year or 18 months or so?
Yeah, I think, when you talk value, I think there's so much more to the equation than price, right? Price is just a part of it. But as a guest, I think about when I go out to eat, what do I value? I value good pricing, but I also value a great experience, right? Am I happy with my food? Am I happy with the service, whatever the service model is, whether it's fast casual, full service, fine dining? Am I happy with the level of interaction from people? And do I feel, honestly, my value equation is, do I feel more joyful when I leave than when I came in? And if I do, I feel like that gives me the value I'm looking for as a consumer. And I truly believe more and more people are looking for dining experiences that not only they can afford, but for what they can personally afford, gives them joy, gives them accuracy in their order, that it's meets the time expectations that they laid out, whether it's a business lunch or a casual dinner with your family or a friend, and that the food was great. We can never lose sight of the fact that the food has to be right. It has to be great. It has to taste lovely and delicious. But that people interactions are really important. I really believe that the hospitality industry, and in particular in the restaurant industry, that we have to get back to providing great experiences all the way around for our guests, and that guests will give us high marks on value. Even if they paid a little bit more, it's going to be worth it because they got the food that was delicious. They received the food that they ordered and it was accurate and timely, and their interactions with people made them happy. So if I were to say my best guess for the future of what a value equation means, is that we're still going to be in the middle of people tightening right now. People are tightening. We have an election coming up. There's a lot of unknown. People are still nervous out there, and they're cutting back, and we know that. And so just to provide pricing, in my opinion, is not enough. We have to get back to the basics of the industry, which is people-centric, amazing food, and all of that is wrapped into the price and the value that you expect as a consumer.
That's a fascinating answer because you've spoken there not about a tangible, like the food itself or the service, but the feeling. So part of what the consumer's paying for is the feeling that they get from having had that experience. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. And thinking ahead, over the next 2-3 years, there's a lot of talk about how technology is changing the guest experience and how technology could be used back of house as well. And I guess that could come with some changes to how consumers interact with their customers. I mean, from your perspective, if you look forward, 3 to 5 years, what do you think are some of the trends that consumers might be like looking for when it comes to their experience, and how technology might be able to facilitate that?
I think you have to look at everybody's different in this world, right? And how they want to use brands can be very different within your brand. There are some people that just want to use a digital platform and may have their food ordered and delivered through a third party. They may order from your website, but still have the food delivered. That's a very different interaction. And from a value perspective and a hospitality perspective, what we've been trying to figure out is, what does that look like, right? What is hospitality in a bag when you don't really have a human interaction, but you have a digital interaction? And, what we've been talking about internally and really working on is, and I mentioned it before, is you have to make sure that that order is accurate, because you don't get that second chance like you do if the guest is in your restaurant. You don't get a second chance to make that first impression and to fix it for the guest. But it also has to be timely. If your platform says, hey, your food's going to be ready in 10 minutes, and you've communicated that to the guest, you better deliver on that expectation to the guest. But I think that in the restaurant experience, depending on where you land as a brand, whether it's fast casual, casual dining, fine dining, family dining, could look really different in 5 years as well. Meaning, I've seen several brands that have gone to just kiosk model, right? No guest interaction from a cash perspective. I've seen a couple of pieces of technology around, it's an iPad or a tablet at the front, but it actually has a real person on it versus just the digital platform on a kiosk. I don't know what people are more comfortable with. I think it's definitely age demographic in terms of comfort of a kiosk versus a live person on an iPad or a tablet versus an actual human standing in front of you. And it makes it much more complex for this industry. But I do agree, George, there's going to be so much more around AI, voice ordering, digital ordering. You're going to be able to ask Alexa to just place your order for you. There's so many more components than there were years ago. So I would say that it's just going to continue to grow. I think the challenge for the restaurant industry is going to be guest adoption and picking the right tools, the right technology that integrates with your current platform so you don't have yet another standalone piece of technology. But that also speaks to numerous guests and not just one demographic.
Mm. That's really interesting. And I think from the conversations I hear, there's one set of conversations that's saying, how can we use AI? How can guests interact with it? How can we make it so that guests would like that as part of their experience? And there's another school of thought I hear emerging, which is we should use AI in a way which means guests can have more human interactions, because that's what will differentiate our brand and our experience by giving them great hospitality. I'm fascinated to see how those two sides interplay, and maybe one of them will kind of win out for certain brands and maybe the other in the future. So we'll keep watching that as it emerges. Matt, you're going to finish us off with your final questions.
Yeah, we're going to transition a little bit back to something we spoke about a little earlier in the podcast, but just about leadership. And you're a prominent figure and advocate for female leadership in hospitality. And one thing we'd really like to know is just like, how good a job do you think the hospitality industry is doing right now on one, attracting female talent, but also nurturing female leadership?
I am a huge advocate for women in leadership. I think, I reference back to when I first started in this industry. My background was teaching. I graduated from college with a teaching degree, worked in restaurants to help supplement my income, and just fell in love with the industry. That said, when I was promoted to general manager, a couple of years after entering the industry and had my own restaurant with Chili's, I was the only female general manager in the state of Colorado and one of very few across the company. And I saw that not only as an opportunity to help other women on their journey of business and restaurant industry, but also as sort of my responsibility, to be honest with you, my responsibility to grow as a leader, to be the best possible version of myself that I could be and help others on their journey. And that's always stuck with me and been important. I think mentorship is extremely important, that women leaders still face obstacles that their male counterparts do not. You can talk to women across our country now that still face the obstacles of people wanting to speak to the male boss versus the female boss, of people wanting to not promote females because of various reasons, right? But females still face that in the industry. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there are differences, and there are differences that make us great. There's tons of studies out there around gender equity. And when your teams are more balanced with male and female, that results get better for the business. So I really lean into that. I also think it's really important to be that person for somebody else, to pay it forward to somebody else and be there for somebody else. I'm involved in an organization called Leadership Exploration and Development. And we provide for emerging leaders, not just female leaders, but emerging leaders across the country. We host 3 to 4 events a year where we have a variety of development that occurs at a very low cost, because we know that small organizations don't always have the money to provide ongoing learning and development for people in the organization. And so we came in wanting to fill that gap. It's a 1 evening workshop, very low cost. Right now, the cost is $40 to enter, and you get 4 to 5 hours of development with key leaders within the industry, talking about everything from their life lessons to financial decisions, to customer engagement. There's a ton of development within Lead that happens, and a lot of work that goes into it. And our next one actually is next week in Houston. So I'm really excited to be in Houston and get in front of, we cap our entry to 100 guests. And it's really exciting to see these emerging leaders come in and be able to interact with CEOs, COOs, brand presidents, VPs of franchise, CFOs. We have a great lineup of people depending on the city we go to. So it's really exciting to see the emerging leader segment of our brand have some attention.
Very well said, Robin. And I believe actually at the next one I saw Katie from your team will actually be speaking there as well. Is that right?
Yes, she's on our panel this time around. She'll be amazing, as you know. But I think it's really important for people to see other people who are either in the role that they want to be in, be that a COO or a CEO or a CFO role. That's important. But emerging leaders also want to know, hey, how do I just get to the next level? How do I become a director in my organization? What are the steps I should take? And so Katie is on that panel. And I'm really excited for her to talk about her experiences as a mom and as a business leader in the organization. She's a tremendous leader.
We will definitely be posting more information on Lead in the description below. This was Robin Robison, president of Thrive Restaurant Group. Robin, it was amazing to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Matt. Thank you, George. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Menu Mix. If you want to get in touch with questions, feedback, or suggestions for future guests to feature on the show, please reach out at info@menumixpod.com to stay up to date with all of our latest episodes and to get access to exclusive and behind-the-scenes content. Subscribe to our newsletter. The link is in the description below. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tasty out there, and we'll see you next week.